This is the story of a warship designed to cheat. A ship so powerful it technically broke the law before it even touched water, and whose career would be defined by surviving disasters that should have sent it to the bottom of the ocean. This is the story of a vessel that was, in many ways, a perfect microcosm of the empire it served. Ambitious, brilliant, deeply flawed, and ultimately doomed. It was a ship that refused to die, that changed its very form to keep fighting, and that left behind a legacy of controversy and awe. This is the incredible history of the Japanese cruiser Mogami. In the world of naval warfare, treaties are supposed to create a level playing field, a gentleman's agreement to limit the endless and expensive race for bigger, better warships. After World War I, the great naval powers were exhausted and nearly bankrupt, and they sought to cap the explosive growth of their fleets. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 was the first major step, but it left loopholes. The London Naval Treaty of 1930 tried to plug those gaps, specifically by defining what made a cruiser heavy versus light. The line was drawn at the caliber of the main guns. Anything with guns larger than 6.1 inches or 155 millimeters was a heavy cruiser, and each nation was strictly limited in how many of those they could build. Guns of that size or smaller meant you were a light cruiser, a category with fewer restrictions. To the treaty signatories, this seemed like a clear and enforceable rule. But to the designers of the Imperial Japanese Navy, or IJN, it was less a rule and more of a creative challenge. Japan, an island nation utterly dependent on its navy, felt constrained and disrespected by the treaty ratios, which granted the United States and Great Britain naval superiority. If they couldn't outbuild their rivals numerically, they would outthink them. And so, from this mindset of defiant ingenuity, the Mogami class was born. On paper, the 4 ships of the class, Mogami, Mikuma, Suzuya, and Kumano, were perfectly legal light cruisers. They were declared with a displacement just under the 10,000-ton limit, and, most importantly, they were armed with 15 155mm guns. These guns were housed in 5 triple turrets, a staggering amount of firepower for a light cruiser, more than any comparable ship in the world. The arrangement was unique and intimidating. 3 turrets forward, 2 aft. This gave the Mogami a terrifying forward broadside. But the real secret, the audacious deception at the heart of the design, was that the entire ship was built around a lie. The Japanese naval architects, led by the brilliant and innovative Yuzuru Hiraga, designed the Mogami from the keel up to be a heavy cruiser in disguise. The 155mm gun turrets were intentionally designed to be easily removed. The turret rings, the barbettes, and the ammunition hoists were all built to the dimensions required for a much larger weapon, the standard Japanese 203mm or 8-inch heavy cruiser gun. The plan was simple and cynical. Build the ships as light cruisers to satisfy the treaty, and then, at the first opportunity when the treaty system inevitably collapsed, they would pull the ships into dry dock, swap out the turrets, and unveil a fleet of 4 brand-new top-of-the-line heavy cruisers overnight. It was a stunning piece of forward planning and a flagrant violation of the spirit, if not the exact letter, of the law. To achieve this, the designers had to push the boundaries of naval architecture. To pack so much potential firepower, high speed, and decent protection onto a hull that was officially under 10,000 tons, they had to get creative with weight saving. Large portions of the hull and superstructure were not riveted in the traditional way, but were electrically welded. This was a relatively new and not entirely understood technology in shipbuilding, but it promised to save hundreds of tons. They used light aluminum alloys for parts of the superstructure, including the bridge, and they installed incredibly powerful engines capable of pushing the ship to a blistering 35 knots, or about 65 kilometers per hour, making her one of the fastest cruisers in the world. The result was a ship that, on paper, looked like a masterpiece. It was fast, heavily armed, and seemingly compliant. But this masterpiece was built on a foundation of dangerous compromises. The first cracks in the facade appeared almost immediately. During Mogami's sea trials in 1935, the problems began to surface. The extensive and improperly applied welding caused the hull to deform under stress. It warped and buckled in ways the designers hadn't anticipated. Firing a full broadside of her 15 guns would have quite literally threatened to tear the ship apart. The stress on the hull was immense. Worse still, the ship was dangerously top-heavy. By cramming so much armament and a large superstructure onto a narrow hull to achieve high speed, they had created a vessel with poor stability. She rolled violently in heavy seas, making her a poor gun platform and an uncomfortable ship for her crew. She was a prize fighter with a glass jaw. The true, terrifying extent of these design flaws was exposed in what became known as the Fourth Fleet Incident. On September 26, 1935, the Mogami and her sister ship Makuma, along with a large portion of the Japanese fleet, sailed directly into the path of a massive typhoon. The storm was a brutal, real-world stress test that the ships failed catastrophically. The colossal waves subjected the fleet to forces beyond anything they were designed to handle. Destroyers had their bows ripped clean off. The carrier Ryujo's flight deck was smashed. For Mogami, the results were devastating. The welds on her hull began to crack and split. Plates buckled, and the structural integrity of the ship was critically compromised. While she survived, she limped back to port, battered and broken, proving that the shortcuts taken in her design had created a ship that was a danger to herself and her own crew. The incident was a massive embarrassment for the IJN. It sent shockwaves through the Naval Command, revealing that many of their newest warships, built with the same weight-saving techniques, were structurally deficient. A massive and secret program of reconstruction was immediately launched for the entire class. Mogami was taken into dry dock and effectively rebuilt. Her hull was strengthened with the addition of bulging torpedo blisters, which also improved her stability. The weak welded seams were reinforced with riveting, and much of the superstructure was torn down and reconstructed to be smaller and lighter. This costly and time-consuming process added over 2,000 tons to her weight, but it turned her from a flawed concept into a viable fighting machine. It was during this period of rebuilding that the treaty system she was designed to circumvent finally collapsed. In 1937, Japan withdrew from the naval limitations, and the pretense was dropped. Mogami and her sisters were taken back to the yards, and their original sin was fulfilled. The triple 155mm turrets were removed and replaced with twin 203mm turrets. The lie was complete. The light cruiser Mogami was now, officially, the heavy cruiser she was always meant to be. When war finally came to the Pacific in December 1941, Mogami was a seasoned, strengthened, and formidable weapon. She was assigned to Cruiser Division 7 with her three sisters, forming a powerful squadron that would see immediate and intense action. Her first major operations were in support of the Japanese invasions of Malaya and the Dutch East Indies. It was here, in the chaotic and confusing naval battles of early 1942, that Mogami would prove her worth. Her moment of triumph came during the Battle of Sunda Strait on the night of February 28, 1942. A small, fleeing Allied fleet consisting of the American heavy cruiser USS Houston and the Australian light cruiser HMAS Perth stumbled into a massive Japanese invasion force in the strait between Java and Sumatra. A brutal, close-range night battle erupted. In the darkness and confusion, Mogami and her sister ship Makuma, along with their destroyer screen, closed in on the Allied cruisers. The battle was a maelstrom of gunfire and torpedoes. At one point, the ships were so close that the Houston could rake the Japanese ships with her machine guns. But the Japanese numbers and superior torpedo technology were decisive. Mogami fired a spread of 6 of her devastating Type 93 Long Lance torpedoes. While these torpedoes were aimed at the Allied cruisers, they ran on and, in a tragic case of friendly fire, struck and sank 4 Japanese transport ships and a minesweeper. However, in the chaos, her guns and other torpedoes found their mark. Both the Houston and the Perth were overwhelmed by the combined firepower of the Japanese force and sunk with heavy loss of life. For Mogami, it was a clear victory, the demonstration that the troubled ship had finally become the deadly predator she was designed to be. Following this success, Mogami and Cruiser Division 7 took part in the spectacular Indian Ocean Raid in April 1942, a sweeping operation that saw the Japanese fleet sink a British aircraft carrier, 2 cruisers, and numerous merchant ships, asserting their dominance across the region. At this point, Mogami and the IJN seemed invincible. They had swept across the Pacific and Indian Oceans in a mere 5 months, crushing every fleet that stood in their way. But naval warfare is a fickle business, and fortunes can turn with shocking speed. Mogami's darkest day, a day that should have been her last, was just around the corner, waiting for her in the turquoise waters of a tiny atoll named Midway. In June 1942, the IJN launched its most ambitious operation yet, a complex plan to seize Midway Atoll and lure the American Pacific Fleet into a final, decisive battle where it could be annihilated. Mogami and the entire Cruiser Division 7 were assigned to the invasion force, tasked with providing close fire support for the troop landings. The plan was a masterpiece of Japanese naval doctrine, involving multiple fleets converging from different directions. But it was also fatally complex and based on the flawed assumption that the Americans would react exactly as predicted. They did not. Thanks to American codebreakers, Admiral Chester Nimitz knew the Japanese were coming, and he set a deadly trap. The main Japanese carrier force was famously devastated by American dive bombers on June 4th, but the battle was far from over. With the main invasion postponed, Mogami's cruiser division was ordered to conduct a nighttime bombardment of Midway Island itself. As the 4 heavy cruisers steamed at high speed through the darkness, they received a sudden order to abort the mission and retire. The squadron's commander, Admiral Kurita, ordered a sharp turn to port. In the confusion of the high-speed maneuver in pitch blackness, disaster struck. The flagship Kumano had to swerve hard to avoid a collision, and the ships behind her followed suit. But Mogami, the 3rd ship in line, was too slow to react. Her helmsman turned the wheel, but it was too late. With a horrific screech of tearing metal, Mogami's bow sliced deep into the port side of her sister ship, Mikuma, just ahead of the bridge. The collision was catastrophic. Mikuma's fuel tanks were ruptured, and she began leaking a thick trail of oil. But it was Mogami that had suffered the more crippling blow. Her bow was completely crushed, bent back at a sharp 90-degree angle. It acted like a giant rudder, making steering almost impossible. Her forward momentum was killed, and her speed was drastically reduced to a mere crawl. The 2 crippled cruisers, accompanied by 2 destroyers, were left behind as the rest of the Japanese fleet retreated at high speed. They were alone, wounded, and sailing in waters now dominated by American air power. Dawn on June 5th brought the inevitable. The crippled ships were spotted by American search planes. Soon after, they were attacked by Marine Corps dive bombers from Midway. They scored no direct hits, but the near misses caused further damage. The real ordeal began the next day, on June 6th. Dive bombers from the American carriers USS Enterprise and USS Hornet descended on the wounded cruisers like birds of prey. Mikuma, leaking oil and an easy target, was hit repeatedly. Bombs ignited her torpedoes, causing a massive secondary explosion that tore the ship apart. She became a burning, sinking wreck. Attention then turned to Mogami. She became the sole focus of the American pilots. The ship was rocked by a series of devastating bomb hits. One bomb struck her number 5 turret, the rearmost one, killing the entire crew inside. Another hit the aircraft deck, starting ferocious fires among the ready-use ammunition and fueled-up float planes. A 3rd bomb penetrated deep into the engine rooms, and a 4th hit near the bridge. The ship was transformed into a floating inferno. The heat was so intense it buckled the steel decks and melted the paint off the bulkheads. Over 80 of her crew were killed instantly in one hit alone, and hundreds more were wounded. By all accounts, she should have sunk. Any other ship would have. But the crew of the Mogami refused to let her die. In one of the most incredible feats of damage control in naval history, her sailors, led by the surviving officers, fought back against the flames and the flooding. They jettisoned torpedoes and other explosives to prevent further detonations. They formed bucket brigades to fight the raging fires. Despite the horrific damage, the mortal wounds, and the constant threat of renewed air attacks, they managed to contain the fires and keep the ship afloat. Miraculously, her aft engine rooms were still functional, Slowly, painfully, the shattered and burning hulk of the Mogami began to limp away from the scene of her sister's demise, steering a ragged course back towards Japan. She left over 900 dead and a trail of debris behind her, but she was alive. Her survival was nothing short of a miracle, a testament to the sheer grit of her crew and the underlying toughness of her reconstructed hull. Mogami eventually made it back to the naval base at Truk, and then to Sasebo in Japan. The sight that greeted the dockworkers was horrifying. Her entire bow was gone, her superstructure was a blackened, twisted wreck, and her aft section was scorched and riddled with holes. The damage was so extensive that many in the Naval Command argued for her to be scrapped. She was a ghost ship, a relic of a battle that had cost the IJN 4 of its finest aircraft carriers and its aura of invincibility. But Japan was now in a desperate war. The losses at Midway were staggering, and every major hull was now priceless. More importantly, the battle had exposed a critical weakness in Japanese naval strategy, a lack of long-range reconnaissance. The carriers were gone, and the fleet was now blind. This thinking led to a radical decision. Mogami would not be scrapped, nor would she simply be repaired. She would be reborn as something entirely new. She was towed into the dry dock at Sasebo, and one of the most unique naval conversions of World War II began. The two shattered and useless aft turrets, numbers 3 and 4, were completely removed, along with the massive barbettes that supported them. In their place, engineers constructed a large flat flight deck that extended over the stern. It was not a full aircraft carrier flight deck. She couldn't land planes. It was a handling deck, equipped with cranes and an extensive rail system. The new design was intended to carry a powerful force of 11 of the new HE-16A Zuion, or PAL, reconnaissance float planes. These were advanced aircraft, capable of dive bombing as well as scouting. The idea was to create a hybrid aviation cruiser. Mogami's role would be to sail with the fleet and use her aircraft to scout for the enemy hundreds of miles away, filling the reconnaissance gap left by the loss of the carriers. Her forward guns, 3 twin 203mm turrets, were retained, giving her significant firepower. She was also fitted with the latest Type 22 surface search radar and a bristling new array of anti-aircraft guns. The conversion took nearly a year, but by April 1943, she emerged from the dockyard a completely different ship. She was arguably the world's first dedicated hybrid helicopter carrier, except her aircraft were float planes. It was an innovative solution born of desperation, an attempt to plug a gaping hole in Japan's warfighting capability. The irony was that production of the new Zuion aircraft was so delayed that Mogami never received her full complement. She went back to war with a new body, but armed with older, less capable float planes. For the next year and a half, the new aviation cruiser Mogami served in a variety of roles, mostly as a transport and escort vessel, her powerful scouting potential never fully realized. She was present at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, but her aircraft played a negligible role in the disastrous Japanese defeat. Her final act, however, would come 4 months later in the largest naval battle in human history, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. In October 1944, the United States began its invasion of the Philippines, a move that the IJN knew it had to counter at all costs. The resulting Japanese plan, Operation Shogo, was a desperate, complex, and ultimately suicidal gamble. It involved splitting the remaining Japanese fleet into 3 forces to attack the American invasion fleet at Leyte from multiple directions. Mogami was assigned to the Southern Force, commanded by Admiral Shoji Nishimura. This force, consisting of 2 old battleships, the Mogami and 4 destroyers, was given the suicidal mission of forcing its way through the narrow Surigao Strait during the night to attack the American landing beaches from the south. It was a trap. The American 7th Fleet, under Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, was waiting for them. Oldendorf, a meticulous and deadly tactician, had prepared a perfect ambush. He lined the sides of the strait with dozens of PT boats and destroyers, and at the northern end he positioned his main battle line of 6 battleships, many of them Pearl Harbor survivors, and 8 cruisers. He was about to perform the classic naval maneuver known as crossing the T, where his ships could bring all their guns to bear on the approaching enemy, who could only reply with their forward guns. As Nishimura's force steamed into the strait in the early hours of October 25th, they were savaged. First came the PT boat attacks, then relentless torpedo attacks from the American destroyer squadrons that sank one of the battleships and disabled 2 destroyers. Then, as the surviving Japanese ships entered the main part of the strait, Oldendorf gave the order to open fire. The night exploded as hundreds of heavy-caliber shells from the American battleships and cruisers rained down on the Japanese column. It was a slaughter. The battleship Yamashiro was hit repeatedly and blew up. The remaining ships were torn apart. Mogami, being one of the leading ships, came under a torrent of fire from the American cruisers. She was hit by at least 4 8-inch shells. One shell slammed into her bridge, killing her captain, her executive officer, and virtually everyone on the command staff instantly. The ship was left leaderless and steaming directly into the shell fire. Another shell hit her engine room, and fires broke out across the ship. With her command structure obliterated and burning fiercely, the senior surviving officer ordered a retreat. But Mogami's trials were not over. As she turned to flee the strait, shrouded in smoke and confusion, she collided with the heavy cruiser Nachi, which was part of a second, trailing Japanese force. The impact tore a large hole in Mogami's side and worsened her fires. Somehow, she once again survived the initial cataclysm. She managed to escape the strait, but she was a floating wreck. She was on fire from bow to stern, her engines had failed, and she was dead in the water. As dawn broke, she was spotted by American aircraft. A final, merciless series of air attacks began. She was hit by another 10 to 20 bombs. Her crew, who had fought so bravely, could do no more. The fires were completely out of control, and the ship was slowly settling. The order was given to abandon ship. That afternoon, the destroyer Akabono came alongside to rescue the survivors and to perform the final, sad duty. A single Japanese torpedo was fired into the flank of the battered, burning cruiser. Mogami, the ship of lies, the survivor of Midway, the unique hybrid, finally gave up her long fight. She rolled over and sank beneath the waves of the Bohol Sea, taking 192 of her crew with her. For years, her exact location remained a mystery, until May 2019, when the research vessel Petrel finally discovered her wreck, confirming the final resting place of one of history's most remarkable warships. The story of the Mogami is more than just the history of a single ship. It's a story about ambition outstripping ability, about ingenious design undone by fatal flaws. It is a testament to the incredible bravery and resilience of sailors who can take a shattered, burning wreck and sail it home across an ocean. Her transformation from a heavy cruiser in disguise to a one-of-a-kind aviation cruiser speaks to the desperation and innovation of a navy that knew it was losing. She was unlucky, but she was also unbelievably tough. She was a cheat, a survivor, a hybrid, and a warrior to the very end. Her journey through triumph, disaster, and rebirth is one of the great naval sagas of World War II. What do you find more fascinating? The audacious deception of her initial design, or the incredible resilience she showed in surviving Midway? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy peeling back the layers of military history to uncover stories like this, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We are always on the hunt for new targets, and your mission briefing to us is crucial. If there's a particular warbird, warship, iron horse, or battle legend you think deserves to have its story told, drop your suggestion below. We read every single one, and your idea could become our next investigation. Thank you for watching.